All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our unit leader briefing for today. And yes, it's the 21st and not the 20th. I appreciate all the offers to buy me a new 2019 calendar, so I appreciate that very, very much. So here are the topics that we're going to look at today, and some of these won't take very much time at all, but I just wanted these to be on your radar as we're moving forward. And I'm going to leave my video off just because of the broadband issues I'm encountering here. So just first of all, a few dates to be aware of, and those include the Unit Leader Conference in December 16th and 17th. That has been canceled with the transition to engagement zones. You can take the Unit Leader Conference off your calendar for the December 16th and 17th. January 1 is when our engagement zone model launches, and then two really important dates as we get into 2020. One is on January 30th that evening, and I believe the time is 7:30. A calendar invite went out on this, is when we'll have our Legislative Day briefing for the NASEB Legislative Day, which is on the 5th. And you'll remember last year we did this briefing the night before, and feedback we received is you'd rather have that a week or so ahead of time. So perhaps you can even perhaps schedule an extension board meeting that evening, or use the recording from that evening with a board meeting that might happen between then and the 5th. And it just gives you and your board a little more time to think about what that engagement experience looks like when it happens on the 5th. And then we will have Heath Mello and Michelle Waite with us during that Legislative Day briefing to give us just an update on what's going on in the unicameral and some tips and strategies on how we best go about engaging our senators. And then on February 5th is the NASEB Legislative Day, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. So disaster recovery and preparedness. I'm going to go ahead and turn my chat on here so I can see. So disaster response and recovery. So as we talked about at Fall Conference, the work in many parts of the state continues. And I just ask that everyone has vigilance, just a lot of situational awareness about what's happening in your community, and how extension can best plug in as appropriate to those the needs that may be present, and that's going to vary widely across the state. And then to be vigilant for the next potential disaster. We don't know what's going to happen in 2020, so really encourage you to be thinking about preparedness. So just think about putting together that office disaster preparedness plan that Ashley's been visiting with various counties about. And I'd also be thinking about a preparedness plan for your county fairgrounds. And that was a lot of you dealt with county fairgrounds disaster preparedness plans, not just essentially the recovery after an event, but thinking about what would happen if you had a disaster strike during the county fair or during a large event at the fairgrounds. Thinking about what that planning might look like, how you would instruct participants, people on site, what our responsibilities are and such. And Ashley Mueller can help you work through that. The service ships continue. And so if you have additional interest or ideas or projects for service ship students, contact Kathleen. We'd like to continue that process or renew current service ships if that makes sense as well. Some really cool products coming out of the service ship experiences for our NU students. Also wanted you to know that we do have a postdoc student hired through the North Central Centers. Kwan's son is a postdoc student who came to us from Utah State. You'll see Kwan at various disaster mitigation recovery meetings, and he may be contacting you if you are in a hard-hit area, just to come and maybe tour the area to get some more insight from you about what happened and what the current needs are. He's in the process of putting together a proposal for a project that he would work on that would focus on mitigation and helping the state be better prepared moving forward. Some have asked about how are we going to assess our response and recovery efforts, and we obviously did the surveys in August, and so we have all of that data. Another thing we're thinking about doing, and this would be sometime in early 2020, is doing some focus group conversations across the state in those areas that were highly impacted, and visiting with residents, producers, emergency managers, other FSA professionals, other partners that we may have worked with in the response process and recovery process, to do just an overview of how things worked at the local level, regionally, and across the state, and how effective extension was with plugging in, and how we can maybe do that better next time if in fact that can be improved. So just watch for that. That's something I'll be working with Jill Lingard on in pursuing that. That's a few months away. And then an activity insight, and I've been mentioning this in the activity insight training. We're encouraging everyone to have a goal. I think Chuck mentioned this at fall conference. Everyone to have a goal relative to either your recovery efforts regarding disasters that happen in your region as we move into 2020, or it could also be a preparedness piece as well. Something that, it could be the plan I just mentioned. It could be actually experiencing the first aid, mental health first aid training. I think chat with Chuck will have a few ideas for you to consider here in a couple of weeks as you're putting activity insight together. But we do want everyone thinking about what we were doing in 2020 relative to disasters that happened in 2019. Go ahead, Angie, move on.
Dave, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is your, on the previous slide, is your response or looking at the impact of our disaster efforts tied with Ashley Mueller's working with the North Central region? I think Bo Blue is working on looking at that across a larger region. Are you tied into that as well?
You know, actually, we have not talked about that yet. So we definitely need to do that to see how it does plug in, because we'll have more of a micro, closer look at it. So, but it definitely needs to be a part of that larger scale effort.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. I will talk to Ashley about that. Great point. Just a reminder on Extension Board member recruiting. I'm sure much of this has already happened or is in process, but just really try to recruit great talent to those Extension Board positions and folks who are going to contribute to your board and make us stronger as a system and represent the entire university. That's been serving us really well. Not just focus on extension. We obviously use the extension world and our experiences and the impacts we make in our conversations, but we're all representing the greater university and INR as well. So if you have any challenges with recruiting new board members or questions about that, I'd love to visit with you more individually about that process as you wrap that up here next month. Next slide, Angie. NASEB, I probably heard more about NASEB in 2019 than in a long time. So as we mentioned, I think earlier, they have a new set of bylaws they talked about at their annual meeting last February. They are now aligning all their directors to be associated with engagement zone regions. So there'll be 2 directors in each engagement zone, except in the zone 9, there will actually be 4 directors because of the large number of senators in that region. And so I know that Elaine Pyle, who is the nominating committee chair on NASEB, has been in touch with a lot of you about voting for the NASEB directors moving into, that will take office in February at the annual meeting. And she's put out some very detailed instructions on that. And a lot of those elections have all taken place, and they are pretty competitive in some of the zones. So that is actually, that's great to see that we've got some individuals that are doing really good work with NASEB, and each county gets 1 vote for who they want their 2, or in the metro region, their 4 directors to be. So make sure your extension board votes and has a say in that. The recruiting the NASEB directors, that all goes back to the extension board recruiting the extension board members, because you have to have been an extension board member or a current extension board member to be a NASEB director. So it all starts with the recruiting that you're doing at the local level right now. Those are the folks that will eventually be in line to be NASEB directors. So always keep that in mind, and what kind of a spokesperson they would be for the university and extension. I put Elaine Pyle's email address on the screens because it doesn't have Elaine's name in it. It's the name of their ranch, I believe, out in Scottsbluff County. So just know that if you get an email from that Hobart 1951 email address, that is Elaine, and that's one that might get stuck in your spam potentially. So Elaine's the person to contact as far as the election process, and if you have any questions about how that works, please be in touch with her.
Dave, would you clarify, NASEB directors can be past board members? They don't have to be current?
That is correct. That is correct. And the one thing I would just ask in that case, this is based on a lot of experiences, if they're a past extension board member, make sure it's someone who's staying up to date with what extension is today. If they've been away too long, or it's someone who won't actively stay in touch with what's happening in your local area with extension, maybe not a great choice. But if it is someone who continues to be active and engaged with extension and participating in programs and really can talk about it in a contemporary way, absolutely, they are potential candidates. Any other questions on NASEB? Okay, let's move on to engagement zones. So obviously you know what the map looks like. Let's go on to the next slide, Angie. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had something about engagement zones. So you just know that the process for, this is just relative to NASEB. So these are the new NASEB regions. The old regions will dissolve, really effective at their annual meeting in February, and then they'll transition to aligning directly with engagement zone regions moving forward. So 2 in every region except region or zone 9, which will have 4 NASEB reps. And by the way, those NASEB reps, if they are an officer, so if they're a president, secretary, treasurer, vice president, or past president, those individuals have an office. So you can have 2 additional directors in addition to those officers. The officers really don't count within the 2 or 4 members per zone. So keep that in mind.
Dave, is there any compensation at all for distance traveled? I know a lot of that's done in Zoom and stuff. Just how do we stay connected well when we're from Sioux County?
Yeah, as far as the NASEB directors?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing that has helped this group out immensely is that they do meet monthly via Zoom, and that has changed their world completely, because they are in touch rather than twice a year at face-to-face meetings. They're talking every month or more often. And then they have their own guidelines as to what they reimburse for regarding mileage and travel. So Jenny, I'll bring that up. We have an NASEB director meeting tonight. I'll bring that up with the group and just to renew that on their radar screen to see if they want to talk about that further. All right, next slide, Angie. So county impact reports, you've heard a lot from Angie and Mike about this recently, and the process is really the same as it's been the last few years. I just put the link up here for the report template. And just one addition to this, as you're putting these together, we actually refer a lot of stakeholders to these county impact reports. So think about if we're going to highlight Hall County, whatever county it is, just think about what are those 3 or so things that you really want the state senator, a county board member, a decision maker to know about your local program. What would really resonate well with them in your estimation, and think about things that, I mean, I know it's hard when you have a lot of programs going on, but think about which ones maybe would be the most cross-cutting, which ones would be very innovative, etc. And any questions about formatting and putting those reports together, Angie and Mike can help you with that. So thank you for doing that. We use those a lot. Next slide, Angie. Activity Insight training highlights. Just wanted you to be aware Some of you were on the overall activity insight training yesterday. That was research, teaching, and extension all together. On December 10th, I'll do a training that's just focused just on extension. That will be a lot more compact and just focus on extension itself. But there are some changes that you will notice. Some retitling of sections, some major revisions, and such. So just be aware that is the case, and just ask all the educators and assistants in your office to watch that video so they're aware of the changes and how we'd like the activity insight report to be completed. And the website, sometimes it's hard to find where the entry point is. Just Google IANR Activity Insight. It'll take you to the website listed at the bottom of the page. And there's some help on that page. And then there's a link directly into the Activity Insight document. If you have someone relatively new in your office since, well, let's say August or September, have them go to Activity Insight and just try to log in. What happens is the system does a kind of an annual upload of it, or every few months they do an upload of new employees. But if they joined us after September 1st or somewhere in that ballpark, they may not have access to Activity Insight yet, and we can fix that if that's the case. So they just need to contact someone. Actually, you can do it right through the Activity Insight website. Just send a note to the help and let them know that there's a new individual that needs access, and they'll just need their email and some information like that to do so. Next slide, Angie. So a lot of surveys out there right now. I acknowledge that right up front. There's some surveys that are follow-ups from fall conference around well-being, onboarding, et cetera. So I just ask that you complete those. Those are all really fairly brief feedback pieces that are important to those initiatives, and the one around mental health and wellness as well. Laura Papo is working on her collaboration study around issue teams. I know a lot of you, if you're issue team leaders or just on issue teams, has probably talked to you last spring or this summer about your experience on issue teams and collaborative efforts within extension. And so this is a continuation of that conversation in a survey format. So she has sent her survey out to all members of issue teams to respond to some questions that will help us better understand how we could improve our collaborative team structure moving forward. And that happened, and when she sent that out initially, it was on Veterans Day. And then, of course, that was the week of fall conference. So I know a lot of folks didn't see that. And so she resent it this past Monday, and I'm sure she'll send some reminders as well. So if you would complete that study, that one takes probably around 15 minutes or so. But it's going to be very helpful in helping us move forward and get better. A couple surveys that you'll see here. We're kind of waiting with these until some of these other surveys are winding down. But so the one for extension board feedback regarding educators and assistants in each office, and the same for support staff. Those are ready to launch. We're just going to wait a few days before we do that. So there aren't too many surveys out there on the table. One of the things you'll notice this year, or the respondents will, the extension board members and support staff, is that they will identify the engagement zone and the county that they're representing when they submit that feedback, so that data will be available for in an engagement zone format when it's looked at after January 1st. And both of those surveys, the extension board and support staff surveys, will be open through December 31st.
When are you going to send those out? Did you say that?
We're going to wait till the Laura Papo study winds down a bit. So we could send those out next week, or we could wait till after Thanksgiving. What weekend? What do you think?
Well, I just wanted to make sure I knew, so that I can encourage my board members to get that, to know that it's coming, one, and two, to go ahead and work with it.
Yeah, it's definitely on its way within the next week or 10 days, and they will have throughout the month of December to complete it.
Do you have an introductory email that we might be able to send out warning folks? I mean, that sometimes they get stuff from, who's that Dave guy, or,
Yeah, well, actually we have an introductory piece on the survey. I'll visit with
Okay.
Linda about that. We could use that as the introductory email. component.
Okay.
Dave, I think we had the discussion last year about a lot of our extension board members only see and hear our reporting during our extension board meetings.
Mhm.
We talked about having them get the evaluation after our AIs are done so they can see our AIs and what our depth and breadth of work is. I mean, is that any consideration that they evaluate us after our AIs are done? Why do they need to do it now?
Yeah, the biggest challenge there is that their appointments, some of their appointments officially end in December. So, and the new board members officially come on in January.
So we can't be sending it to the ones that were the calendar year prior to that and them evaluate us?
Yeah, I remember we talked about this, Tracy.
I mean, to me, it doesn't make any sense if they don't see our AI when they're evaluating us. And the purpose of their evaluation is to help the supervisor above all of us make some kind of decision.
Right. It's just their perspective on how the educators and assistants are performing in their region. One of the things that I always encourage extension board members to do is obviously we want as many as possible to give us feedback, but if they haven't participated in a program, or let's say there's a food nutrition health educator in their region and they aren't really in tune with that educator, they're not involved in their programs. If they don't have what they feel like is informed feedback, I'd rather they not give us feedback. So I hear you what you're saying about activity insight. I'm just thinking about the time frame and how long it would take to get that feedback from them, and whether it would be in a timely enough fashion to include in our feedback for educators and assistants in early 2020. Since that's really compressed there between when the activity insights are due and everything has to be, conversations and everything have to be completed by March 15th and back to INR. So that is the challenge, quite frankly, that we're working with there. What do others think about that?
I think Tracy makes a good point.
I'll chime in as well. And yes, the staff have asked that quite a few times. So I thought timing was kind of the issue more than, I guess, board members going off. Hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I think it would be helpful. We kind of took a step here to try to help with this in having each of the educators write up just a little narrative each month to let the extension board know kind of what they did that month, but then that's making them review like a ton of information from the year if they want to do a feedback. So the other question that I've received quite a bit is, are staff supposed to see those then at their evaluation? And do all supervisors know to show those, or do they receive those, and do they know to show those?
Yeah, right. So so as a supervisor, yeah, so for extension assistants, for example, you'll receive that feedback as a supervisor, and then it's at your discretion as to how that is used. Because there's feedback that might be very relevant, and there's other feedback that may not be relevant at all. And I just encourage you to use that all with caution. I know I always thought about that with educator conferences. There was, it had to be something very meaningful, something that would triangulate with other input before I felt really comfortable sharing it. Because if it's just a one-off comment from someone who's uninformed or maybe got sideways with one of our folks, I mean, I'm real cautious about, I don't want to write that into an evaluation document, or even bring that up with a faculty or staff member if I'm not pretty confident that it has substance behind it. So that's at the discretion of the supervisor. It's not required that you include that data or input. Does that work? Is that what you've been doing, Karen, or?
Yes, well, okay, I hope I followed what you said there. I guess I don't ever see any of those. Of course, I'm not a supervisor of educators.
Right.
And we don't include, there's too many, so we don't have our extension board evaluated assistants or the associates. So, yeah, I don't know. I've had a couple educators over the time say, well, I haven't ever seen anything that the board has written. So I said I would ask at some point.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily think today, but yeah,
Right.
you know, I mean, hearing all this, Dave, is this really something of value?
You know, that's exactly where I was going with this, Karen. So if we don't do this, we will hear from our stakeholders, you know, that they want this opportunity for feedback. On average, if you look across the state, I'm going to say probably 20, maybe 30%, 20 to 25% of extension board members take advantage of this opportunity. A lot of the feedback is fairly generic. You know, it's kind of doing a really good job, really appreciate Karen, keep up the good work. I mean, there's some meaningful comments in there as well, but not as much of that as you would probably anticipate. And the same thing will happen with the extension assistant feedback. So as a supervisor, that's why I want you to just take that and use that as you feel it's appropriate.
Okay,
And so if you don't receive any feedback, that means, first of all, touch base with Linda to make sure that that was the case, that there was no feedback for the assistant. And if there was, it should have went directly to their supervisor. So Tracy, I'm going to jump back to your question for a second. I'll still ponder that and how we could work out that timing. At the moment, I'm not sure if there's a great solution to that as the deadlines and such are currently in place. So,
well, maybe the deadlines need to be adjusted then, Dave. I know that you guys had the pressure of getting it through the system as well. But maybe the extension board needs to know they have a small window and they're warned of it beforehand.
Right.
I think it's challenging for anybody to, you know, look at what they've done work-wise and not know what they've done and only go on assumptions or the few things they've heard in extension board meetings. So I think there's value for them to see it, because I also think that there's opportunity for them to catch programs that they don't maybe even know about that we haven't mentioned, because we're highlighting a few and not all. So, you know, I don't know. And I understand there's not that very many of them respond, but those that want to respond, you know, you need to give them that opportunity. But I think it's kind of silly for them to just be kind of winging their evaluation of us.
Right. And you're correct. If we did that, it'd be a very tight window. So they would have to be on it and commit to reading the activity insight report. And so again, that informed feedback rather than just doing that off the cuff. I'm gonna keep thinking about that. I completely understand the point. Just have to think about whether we think that's really doable or not. So I'll take that into consideration. Angie, let's move on to the next piece. Oh, so, okay, engagement loan zone. I'm sorry, back up. I didn't know you switched the slides already. So local zone interview process coming up. They start tomorrow in Stewart, Nebraska, up in the North Central, and continue through December 9th, I believe. So it's a meet and greet format, internal, external stakeholders. There will be the local venue, unit leaders, and thank you to those unit leaders. We're trying to do a couple locations per zone in almost all cases. Maybe a search committee member or two present as well, and then either Lisa, Gary Zobuk, or I will lead each of those interview sessions. And then the feedback process will be 48 hours for a feedback from those who participate in that local interview process. So those, we have engagement zone listservs in place now. So within your zone, you should have received more detailed information about the schedule in your respective area for this phase of the search. Engaging state senators. This is something we talked about back in August, and hope you've taken the opportunity or thought about what this might look like. Or I know in some cases you have routine breakfasts or luncheons with your state senators in your region, and we want you to keep doing those if you are doing something like that, or finding a way to invite them to maybe a 4-H achievement night or an extension board meeting, or some way to connect with them before the legislative session. That served us really well last year, to have some conversation and introductions before the NASEB Legislative Day. And that's just, there's no real format for this. It's more of a, like I said, making sure we know each other, updating them on what Extension's working on, some great stories, what's happening locally in their district, and involving Extension Board members in those conversations. Ultimately, they should be on the front line, and you may or may not have a lot of Extension Board members who are comfortable with that yet. But always have those Extension Board members with you during these conferences, these conversations, so they can learn from you and others. There's a link on here which we'll send out separately. This is a new link that Jesse Brophy and INR has put together, and this is a simple form just to capture what that interaction with a local state senator was like. So what was the nature of the interaction or the venue? Who was involved? What did you learn from the experience? And then any additional comments. That's information that actually is fed to Michelle Waite and Heath Mello. So they're aware of who's having conversations with senators, and they use all that information as intel as they can imagine. They engage the senators in a number of ways outside the session and during the session, and collectively this is really helpful as we advocate with those individuals. We also have a one-page summary of all of our state senators that we'll be sending your way. So it has a photo of the senator, their district, and some other information, contact information. So sometimes that's nice to have because you recognize the senator visually, and then you have some quick reference material there. And Jesse put that together for us. So we'll share that when we share the link. You can put feedback in this link at any time. So it's just ongoing, but we'd like to have everything, any interaction you've had before the end of the calendar year. Love to have that first part of January, so we can use that to inform us about our February engagement with the senators. Next slide, Angie. Next slide. So this is just, this is that feedback form, and these are the actual questions it's going to ask you on the feedback form. So just very basic things. I'd encourage you at your next Extension Board meeting, or this is going to be an email to them as well, ask all your board members to become a NU advocate. This has been promoted by those in Varner Hall for the last year or two, but this is a simple process just to sign up, and if you're an NU advocate, then you receive correspondence from the NU system about just information, newsletters, dates, things that can help you be a better advocate. And this is both internal and external. So this is for us, for Extension Board members, for anyone to become an NU advocate. So you can see some of the things that advocates are asked to do down below there. Just a way of staying in the loop, so to speak, and to show that you're supporting the NU system. Next slide, Angie. NASEB Legislative Day. So there's that legislative briefing on the evening of January 30th. And again, that'll be recorded, so you can use that with your board member at a later time, or however that best works for you. And February 5th is the NASEB Legislative Day, where we storm the Capitol, and then we have lunch at the Cornhusker, and then a brief program following lunch that day. We asked again that we're going to ask that we have appointments scheduled with all of our state senators on February 5th. I realize in the metro area last year that some of those appointments were in advance and outside of the February 5th, which just has to happen when you're trying to connect with 19 senators all at once. So completely appreciate that. That's definitely fine. But I think we connected with 47 out of 49 last year on the 5th, which was incredible, just amazing that happened. And so the bar was set pretty high. So thank you in advance. More information coming on this, but be thinking about working on this after the first of the year and setting up these appointments. Next slide. Unit leader transition to lead educator. So this will be happening in 2020. And when I say transition, that's, that's still much of that's to be defined, what that lead educator role looks like. In fact, engagement zone coordinators will be involved in that process. Continue to go with your unit leader roles until further information. So I don't expect that this transition is probably going to happen in a real way until it could be after the first quarter of 2020 potentially. And part of the reason for that is we have to decide what that position looks like, and that's kind of morphed and modified as we've talked about engagement zones over the last few months. There'll be an open application period for unit leader or the lead educator role. So there might be an opportunity in your county or your region. If it's something you're not interested in doing anymore, maybe there's someone else that can assume that role. There might be someone who's really anxious to do it too that would like to give it a try. So it's going to be kind of just a reset time for everyone to think about their interest in that role and what that looks like for them going forward. In some cases, obviously, there's not a lot of choices or decisions to be made, right? Because it may be a small office and we need someone in that office to take on this role. There have been questions about whether there will still be, in this case, lead educators that oversee multiple counties or if it will just be one county. And that's, again, a question to be determined. No decision's been made on that. And then we'll be working on what that lead educator and engagement zone coordinator partnership looks like as well. To me, that's probably one of the most important metrics of the entire model is how well that works. As a partnership, as a team, working with Extension Board, the county board, with staff in the office, and how we partner together with all of the things that need to be done in those respective roles. So more to come there, but just wanted you to know that the unit leader roles will continue into 2020 until further notice.
Dave, there is a question in the chat about a unit leader handbook that would include this information too.
Let's see, I'm looking for that.
I was referring to the NU advocates and the senator engagement, all of that stuff lost if we've only heard it once, and I don't have a good place to, go and do that, especially if it's only once a year.
Would that be, Jenny, would that be something that would be helpful if we would take those type of things and put them on the My Extension website in the unit leader section, just as a place we could reference and go back and find that kind of information?
Absolutely. That's where I'm thinking. That's where I always go to look first and be a good place.
That's a really good suggestion.
Could that also be under all your information about being a board member?
Yeah, it could be there as well. That's a great point, Karen. That could be cross-referenced there, right? Because it really needs to be in both.
Yeah.
I'm just looking through the chat section here. I am going to be asking our NASEB directors to spread the word about the NU advocate opportunity too. So, and that's fine if they're talking to board members, but right now the most uniform way to do that is through all of you. If you just when you share that out, share that with your board members, or when you meet with them next, and ask them to. It just takes about 60 seconds to sign up. And as an extension board member, they really should be. If they're not comfortable being an advocate, then I would really question their role on the extension board, because that's a huge part of that role. Randy, I'm looking at your note. Unit leaders need to be copied when extension board members are emailed. Oh yeah, yep, gotcha. Just make sure when we distribute that you're in the loop, so you know it's gone out to board members. Got it. Thank you. Carol asked about, would you talk about the 2 zones that are still searching? Okay, so good question, Carol. So in those 2 zones, we'll be looking for interims to fulfill that engagement zone coordinator role until a permanent coordinator is identified. And I need to visit with Chuck on this for sure. I think what Chuck was planning to do is to connect with everyone within the zone and ask for nominations for individuals within the zone internally to see if they would be willing to do that, take on that responsibility temporarily. The other thing in those zones we'd ask everyone to do, especially if you're in those zones or not even in those zones, but if you know of folks you've thought about that would be good candidates for those zones, please reach out to them. The search process, the application process is open until they are filled. So we don't have to change anything with the search process. Those applicants can be looked at, viewed by the search committee as they arrive on the scene. So we need all of your help in doing this. So I'd think about agencies, organizations that you're working with, program partners, maybe they're our colleagues in other states or even within state. Who do you think we should consider for that role, and encourage them to apply so that they can be considered? Thanks for bringing that up, Carol, because that's a piece moving forward. We want these all zones to have a permanent coordinator ASAP, but there will obviously be a couple of interim appointments in the near future. Are we running a unit leader handbook? And includes all this stuff. Not a unit leader handbook, but there is another document that's well underway. It's basically an extension organizational overview. So it's not specific to unit leaders, but it talks about everything from promotion to activity insight to what do we mean when we talk about excellence, how do we collaborate, just a number of things like that I think is moving in that direction, Jenny, as a go-to resource for some of this general information that everyone really needs to know and be aware of, but currently isn't distributed in a consistent way. Kathy's asking, what is the support staff feedback? Yes, so that is support staff assessing educators and assistants in their office. That is correct. And yeah, Jenny, let me look and see. So the extension board application and job description, that could be on the unit leader, on my extension under unit leaders as well. And we can put our NASEB director nomination form there too. So who gets the results from I think that question is regarding the support staff feedback. Is that right? Yeah, okay. So that would go to the engagement zone coordinator this coming year to review. And this is very much like what I described around the extension board feedback earlier. So this varies widely. And we're always looking to see if it's something that makes sense that we need to have a conversation with an educator or assistant about. Is it triangulated or correlate with anything other information out there, and we decide whether it's relevant or not to include in the conversation. Sometimes it's just a part of the conversation, but rarely is that type of feedback ever included in a performance evaluation document. The question is, do assistants have the opportunity to evaluate their educator? That's a great question, Karen. I'm not sure we do have anything in place for that at the moment. I don't think we do, Karen, and I don't think that's a part of that. I was trying to remember if that was incorporated with the support staff piece. I don't think it is. But that's another piece, right? That's a kind of part of this 360-like feedback that we're striving to have. Not really 360 completely, but as you can imagine, everyone in the system wants a chance to assess and give feedback on others in the system. So we're trying to facilitate that the best we can. And so that's probably a gap right now that we need to look at. Any other questions? I know this was a lot today.
Maybe just a quick comment, Dave, in case anybody missed it in the earlier chat. Randy Pryor shared that he's going to have a retirement reception on December 20th, 3 to 6 down in Wilbur. And I will be having one on Monday, December 30th up here in Tacoma, 3 to 5. So
Okay, awesome. Awesome.
Anyone's welcome to come join us.
Thanks, John. And if you'd be sure to share your announcements with us, or Angie or Eric or I, we'll make sure those get distributed widely within the system too, and help you out with that.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave.
Mm-hmm. Anything else for today?
So Dave, will these unit leader updates continue happening into 2020?
Yeah, I think they need to, and we'll have to decide what frequency that's going to happen at. But as I mentioned, the unit leader role is going to continue until we make that official transition. So, but even at that point, I think there needs to be that communication link with our lead educators, and our engagement zone coordinators will be in the loop at that point as well. So yes, we're going to do something like this moving forward. Okay. Hey, I apologize again for the late start, but I think we did it in an hour. So thank you for being with us today. This is being recorded, and we will share this out if you want to review it, or to take a look at the links again, and we'll send this out to those who could join us today. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.